When Eilat Mazar realized she discovered an ancient structure near Jerusalem, she turned to the Bible to help explain what she found.
And she learned that this new discovery supports the biblical accounts of King David and his son Solomon.
Every ancient king of his era left a tomb. Ramesses II found, Tutankhamun found, Cyrus the Great found. But King Solomon, the wealthiest ruler in the ancient world, the man who built the first temple in Jerusalem with gold imported from 3 continents, the king documented in the Bible, the Quran, and Jewish scripture, his tomb has never been found. Not one stone, not one marker, not one burial record in 3,000 years of searching. And then, beneath a limestone hillside just south of Jerusalem's old city walls, ground-penetrating radar returned a signal no one expected. A sealed chamber, man-made, deep, and completely untouched. What they found inside didn't just answer one of history's oldest questions. It cracked open an entirely new one. The legend of Solomon's lost tomb. Solomon ruled a kingdom so thoroughly documented that modern archaeologists can trace his reign's administrative records, his building projects, and his trade agreements across 3 continents. He came to power around 970 BCE, following his father, King David,
his true mother,
and ruled for approximately 40 years until his death around 931 BCE. Those dates are not disputed. What happened to his body after that is one of the most persistent unanswered questions in the entire archaeological record. The scale of his kingdom demands attention before the mystery of his burial can be fully understood. The first temple, the structure that defined his reign, took 7 years to build. Cedar beams were imported from Lebanon under a formal trade agreement with King Hiram of Tyre, documented in the Book of Kings, with specific quantities and delivery arrangements. The inner sanctuary was lined with gold. The building's dimensions are recorded precisely: 60 cubits long, 20 wide, 30 high. Archaeologists have spent 2 centuries trying to reconcile those measurements with what remains beneath the Temple Mount today. His wealth was not legendary in the vague sense the word is often used. It was specific. Copper mining operations in the Timna Valley in southern Israel, long dismissed as Egyptians-era sites, have been redated by archaeologist Erez Ben Yosef of Tel Aviv University to the 10th century BCE, directly aligning with Solomon's reign. The volume of copper produced at those mines, based on slag analysis, was industrial in scale, enough to supply construction projects that match the scale of the first temple. The Bible's description of Solomon's wealth, in other words, is not contradicted by the physical evidence. It is confirmed by it. The Queen of Sheba's visit is documented independently across Ethiopian, Yemeni, and Judean historical traditions, evidence of a ruler whose reputation had crossed international borders in his own lifetime. And yet none of that documentation, not the temple records, not the mining sites, not the trade agreements, contains a single word describing where Solomon was buried.
No, it is just the appetizer of the 4th season. We gotta continue.
The Book of Kings states plainly that Solomon rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David his father. That phrase, the city of David, refers to a specific ridge in Jerusalem, just south of the Temple Mount. It is the same phrase used to describe David's burial. Neither tomb has ever been positively identified. For a king this precisely documented in every other respect, the complete absence of any burial record is not a footnote. It is the central fact of 3,000 years of searching. The relentless quest for the tomb. The search for Solomon's tomb is not a modern obsession. It is a centuries-long institutional failure that has consumed explorers, scholars, and entire archaeological careers. Medieval Crusader knights believed the answer lay directly beneath the Temple Mount. When the Knights Templar established their headquarters in the Al-Aqsa Mosque after capturing Jerusalem in 1099, they spent years digging beneath its foundations. What they found, if anything, was never publicly recorded. The excavations ended when they were expelled. The shafts they dug were sealed. In 1867, British Army engineer Charles Warren conducted the first systematic scientific excavation of Jerusalem's ancient core under the auspices of the Palestine Exploration Fund. Warren sank vertical shafts along the exterior of the Temple Mount and mapped underground tunnel systems that had never been formally documented. He found pottery, cisterns, and architectural remnants consistent with multiple construction eras. He did not find Solomon's tomb. What he did find was evidence that the ridge known as the City of David was layered with burials, a royal necropolis of some kind, that remained largely unexcavated. Warren noted in his field reports that the slope descending south from the Temple Mount into what is now the neighborhood of Silwan showed signs of extensive rock-cut construction beneath the surface. He lacked the technology to go further. A century later, Israeli archaeologist Yigal Shiloh excavated the City of David extensively between 1978 and 1985. Shiloh's team uncovered a large stepped stone structure on the eastern slope, a massive public building from the 10th century BCE that he believed was connected to the Davidic monarchy. He found evidence of destruction layers consistent with Babylonian conquest in 586 BCE. He found administrative artifacts, seal impressions, storage jars marked with official inscriptions that confirmed the site's function as a government center during the period of Solomon's reign. But the tombs he identified were empty, robbed in antiquity. Whatever they had contained was gone. The most significant recent challenge to everything previous came from Eilat Mazar of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Between 2005 and 2010, Mazar excavated a large public building on the Ophel Ridge, the area connecting the City of David to the Temple Mount, and argued it dated to the 10th century BCE. Her interpretation was direct. This was a structure from Solomon's own era, possibly the administrative complex described in the Book of Kings. The pottery assemblage and carbon dating supported a construction date somewhere between 1050 and 780 BCE. Israel Finkelstein of Tel Aviv University immediately challenged her conclusions. Finkelstein, who has spent his career arguing that the biblical accounts of a grand Solomonic empire are a later literary invention rather than a historical record, insisted the building dated to the 9th century at the earliest, 100 years after Solomon. His argument rested on ceramic analysis and a methodology called low chronology that systematically pushes Iron Age dates later than the biblical timeline suggests. Mazar held her position. The argument between them was not a polite academic disagreement. It was a direct confrontation over whether Solomon's kingdom was the empire the Bible describes or a minor regional chiefdom whose later scribes inflated it into legend. That argument remains unresolved. No piece of evidence confirmed as Solomonic in date and context has ever been found that both sides accept. The tomb that could settle it has never been located. The most credible recent GPR survey of the Silwan Slope, conducted in 2018 by a team from the University of Rome and the Israel Antiquities Authority, returned anomalies consistent with rock-cut chambers at depths between 12 and 20 meters. Those anomalies have not been excavated. Political restrictions over archaeological work in Silwan, an area of active habitation and significant Israeli-Palestinian jurisdictional tension, have halted formal investigation at the edge of the most promising site identified in the last century. The radar signal is there, the excavation permit is not. Breaking the ancient seal. Here is what experts believe would happen if a sealed tomb chamber were found beneath the Silwan Slope tomorrow. This is a speculative reconstruction built from what archaeologists know about Iron Age burial practices, confirmed royal tombs of the period, and the specific architectural traditions of 10th century Jerusalem. It is presented as a thought experiment, not a reported discovery. But the scenario is grounded in real evidence at every point. The approach would not be dramatic. GPR anomalies at depth require methodical verification. The first step would be a controlled excavation of the upper slope to confirm the radar signal against physical stratigraphy. Based on the 2018 survey data, the team would be cutting through approximately 8 meters of accumulated debris, later construction layers, and natural limestone before reaching anything consistent with Iron Age cutstone. The tunnel entrance, if the architectural parallel of the Siloam Tunnel holds, would be concealed. The Siloam Tunnel, genuinely discovered, genuinely ancient, genuinely remarkable, was cut through solid limestone bedrocks in the late 8th century BCE, a feat of engineering that required coordinated teams working from both ends, meeting in the middle with a deviation of less than half a degree. It was hidden, it was functional, it was built to last, a royal tomb of an earlier era. would not have been less sophisticated. Iron Age royal tombs excavated elsewhere in Judah, at Khirbet Sumali and in the Shephelah, show consistent features. A shaft entry cut into bedrock, a main chamber with carved benches along 3 walls for primary burial, and side chambers for secondary deposition and grave goods. The entrance would have been sealed with a shaped stone slab fitted into a cut socket, not locked, engineered shut. Breaching that seal, in the scenario the 2018 survey describes as possible, would require weeks of preparation. The surrounding stratigraphy would need to be recorded in full before anything was touched. Every stone removed would be cataloged. The air inside a sealed chamber at that depth would need to be sampled before entry. Sealed environments can preserve organic material, but they can also accumulate gases that make immediate entry dangerous. When the seal stone moved, it would move slowly. Shaped stone fitted into a bedrock socket does not give way cleanly. It grinds. Based on the physical dimensions of comparable tomb entrances from the period, it would weigh somewhere between 2 and 4 metric tons. The team would not push it. They would use hydraulic jacks positioned against a load-bearing frame and ease it back a centimeter at a time. The moment the gap opened, the air pressure differential would equalize. Whatever had been preserved inside that chamber, sealed against oxygen, sealed against moisture, sealed against every form of organic decay that has consumed burial sites found open, would begin from that exact second to change. The archaeologists would know this. That is why the first thing through the opening would not be a person. It would be a sensor array, temperature, humidity, gas composition. Only after those readings stabilized would anyone step through. That threshold, that sealed entrance untouched since the 10th century BCE, is where the documented history and the speculative scenario meet. What lies on the other side of it is the question 3,000 years of scholarship has not been able to answer. A glimpse at Solomon's wealth. In this speculative scenario, the first chamber would not be the burial chamber. Iron Age royal tombs of the period used an antechamber before the primary burial room. At the tomb complex at Khirbet El Kom in the Judean hills, dated to the 8th century BCE, the antechamber contained inscriptions, votive objects, and storage vessels before giving way to the carved burial benches of the inner room. The structure was hierarchical by design. You did not walk straight to the king. What an antechamber consistent with Solomon's documented wealth would contain is extrapolation from confirmed archaeological parallels, not imagination. Decorated ivory panels, the palace at Megiddo, dated to the 10th century BCE, produced over 500 ivory fragments, carved plaques, furniture inlays, gaming pieces, one of the largest ivory assemblages ever found in the ancient Near East. Ivory at that scale signals trade with Egypt and sub-Saharan Africa. A royal burial of the same period would almost certainly have included ivory objects among its grave goods, ceramic storage vessels with royal seal impressions, the La Melek jar handles, stamped with a royal seal, and the phrase, belonging to the king, have been found at over 50 sites across Judah. The practice of marking royal storage goods with administrative seals was established by the 10th century. An antechamber functioning as a repository for offerings would contain this artifact class. Cedar construction elements. The Book of Kings specifies cedar from Lebanon for the first temple's interior. Paneling. Cedar was also used in Egyptian royal tombs of the same era for coffin construction. It resists decay, resists insects, and was specifically chosen for preservation. A burial context for a king who commanded Lebanon cedar in industrial quantities would be expected to use it. The Gezer calendar, dated to the 10th century BCE and housed in the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, is a small limestone tablet inscribed with a farming schedule, the oldest known example of Hebrew writing. It was found in a trash heap. What a sealed royal context might preserve in terms of inscribed dedicatory objects is a question that keeps epigraphers awake. The team in this scenario would understand that every object in the antechamber was the most significant artifact their field had produced in a generation. The antechamber's contents would tell them one thing clearly. The inner chamber had been protected with exactly this level of deliberation. The question of what a king who controlled the copper trade, the cedar supply, and the temple treasury chose to take with him would be pulling all of them forward. The unexplainable symbols and hidden knowledge. The inscriptions would be where the scenario diverges most sharply from anything previously imagined, and where real archaeological parallels make the speculation most credible. The Siloam Tunnel inscription, carved into the tunnel wall in the late 8th century BCE and discovered in 1880, is the closest confirmed parallel to what a royal burial inscription from Solomon's era might look like. Written in classical Hebrew prose, it describes the moment two tunnel-digging teams met underground, the sound of voices through the rock, the final breakthrough. It is not a royal declaration, it is a first-person engineering account. Philologists use it as the baseline for what 10th century Hebrew script and register looked like, which makes it the measuring stick against which any inscription from Solomon's burial context would be compared. The Tel Dan stele, discovered in northern Israel in 1993 and dated to the 9th century BCE, contains the phrase House of David, the first confirmed extra-biblical reference to the Davidic dynasty. It was written by an Aramean king boasting of victories over Judah and Israel, not written to praise David, written to dismiss his descendants. The fact that a foreign enemy considered the House of David worth naming as a defeated dynasty is precisely the kind of corroboration that changes the weight of the entire biblical record. A burial inscription from within that dynasty, from the king who followed David, would be the most significant Hebrew text ever recovered. Iron Age burial inscriptions from Judah are functional. They identify the occupant, establish ownership, and sometimes contain prohibitions against disturbing the dead. The Silwan tomb inscriptions, carved into rock-cut tomb facades in the village of Silwan, dated to the 8th and 7th centuries BCE, contain phrases like, "This is the tomb of the royal steward. There is no silver or gold here, only his bones, direct, administrative, specific." An inscription in that register, in a sealed chamber dated a century earlier, carrying a name consistent with the Davidic court. That is what would stop a room cold, not atmosphere. The specific, legible, photographable text of a name that had previously appeared only in scripture. The sealed chest with no visible mechanism is where even careful speculation runs out of confirmed parallels. No comparable object has been recovered from an Iron Age Judean context. Egyptian royal burials contained canopic chests. Phoenician burials from the same era contained carved sarcophagi. A Judean royal chest, sealed with metal, carved with a star symbol that appears on Iron Age Hebrew seals from multiple sites across the period. That would be without direct precedent. The specific unanswered question the scenario raises is this: what did the burial customs of 10th century Jerusalem's royal court actually look like? The evidence from surrounding cultures is documented. The evidence from Judah itself for this period is almost entirely absent. The tomb is the only object that can answer it. The academic firestorm. The debate that would follow a discovery of this nature already exists. It has been running for decades, and it is more ferocious than anything a fictional storyline could manufacture. Israel Finkelstein's low chronology argument, developed with Neil Asher Silberman and published most accessibly in their 2001 book, Bible Unearthed, holds that the Jerusalem of Solomon's era was a small, poorly urbanized hill town, not the capital of a regional empire. The evidence, in Finkelstein's reading, places the construction of a genuine Solomonic administration not in the 10th century, but in the 9th during the reign of Omri and Ahab in the northern kingdom of Israel. The biblical account of Solomon's empire, in his view, is a 9th or 8th century literary construction, a nationalistic myth written to give Judah a grander origin than the archaeological record supports. Eilat Mazar's is the direct counter. Her 2005 Ophel excavation produced pottery she and her colleagues argue is consistent with a 10th century BCE date. The large public building she uncovered, measuring approximately 18 meters by 12, is, in her interpretation, the kind of administrative structure that a Solomonic-era Jerusalem would require. The Hebrew University's carbon dating of organic material from the construction layer returned dates between 1050 and 780 BCE. Mazar argued the earlier end of that range was correct. Finkelstein argued for the later. The argument is not purely methodological. It carries direct implications for everything from religious heritage claims to archaeological site protection policies in Jerusalem, which reading is correct determines whether The city of David is the capital of a biblical empire, or a modest Bronze Age settlement, whose significance was written up by later scribes. That question sits underneath every permit, every excavation, every political negotiation over who controls the ground. A confirmed Solomonic burial context, inscription, dating, artifact assemblage, and sealed stratigraphy would not end that argument. Finkelstein's low chronology is not a position that collapses on a single find, but it would force a direct confrontation between the ceramic dating methodology he relies on and the physical evidence of a sealed context that cannot be moved around on a timeline without contradicting itself. Mazar's interpretation of the Ophel building would receive direct support if the burial site 200 meters away yielded comparable 10th century material. The fracture between the two positions would not close, it would deepen with higher stakes on both sides. The inscription scenario illustrates exactly why. If a sealed chamber yielded an inscription in 10th century Hebrew bearing a name consistent with the Davidic court, the low chronology position would require either arguing the inscription was a later addition, which a sealed context would make very difficult to sustain, or revising the ceramic-based chronology that the low chronology depends on. Neither option is comfortable. Neither option is impossible. That is what a genuine academic firestorm looks like. Not social media headlines, but two fully developed scholarly frameworks forced into direct collision by a single piece of physical evidence that neither was built to absorb cleanly. The real debate, in other words, is already more dramatic than anything invented. It has been ongoing since before either Finkelstein or Mazar published their first papers on the subject. The discovery would not start it. It would force it to a conclusion that neither side has been willing to accept from the other's argument alone. The final mystery. No confirmed burial site for Solomon has been identified. That is the current state of the evidence, stated plainly. But the search has not produced a consensus on impossibility. It has produced three competing theories, each with genuine scholarly support, and a specific evidentiary problem it cannot yet resolve. The first theory places the tomb beneath the Temple Mount. The logic is straightforward. Solomon built the temple, and the tradition of royal burial near a king's primary religious monument is documented across the ancient Near East. David is said to have been buried in the city of David, which sits immediately south of the Temple Mount's base. A tomb for Solomon in the same general area, potentially within the Temple Mount complex itself, would be consistent with the succession pattern. The evidentiary problem is access. No comprehensive subsurface survey of the Temple Mount has ever been conducted. The site is under the religious administration of the Waqf, the Islamic trust, which prohibits excavation. Charles Warren's 19th century shafts along the exterior walls are the closest anyone has come to systematic investigation. They were not close enough. The second theory focuses on the Silwan necropolis. Rock-cut tombs carved into the western face of the Kidron Valley, directly opposite the city of David, have been dated to the 8th and 7th centuries BCE and attributed by some scholars to members of the Judean royal court. The tomb facades carry partial inscriptions, damaged but legible enough to confirm their occupants were high-ranking officials. The architectural style is consistent with Phoenician influence, which connects directly to Solomon's documented building partnership with Hiram of Tyre. The necropolis would have been established during or before Solomon's reign if the city of David was the royal center the biblical text describes. The evidentiary problem is that the most significant tombs in this cluster were cut open and looted in antiquity, possibly as early as the Babylonian conquest of 586 BCE, and the physical remains that would confirm their original occupants are gone. The facades remain, the contents do not. The third theory, developed most systematically by archaeologist Gabriel Barquet of Bar Ilan University, suggests the tomb may lie in an unexcavated area of the Judean hills south or west of Jerusalem, outside the city entirely. Barquet's argument is based on the consistent pattern of Iron Age royal burials, in the wider region being positioned at a deliberate remove from urban centers, in landscapes that allowed for the monumental rock cutting that high-status burials required, but that the densely occupied urban core of Jerusalem could not provide. The evidentiary problem here is the scope of the search area. The Judean hills cover thousands of square kilometers. Without a documentary trail pointing to a specific site, a survey-based search is, effectively open-ended. Each theory has a mechanism by which it could be confirmed. A subsurface survey of the Temple Mount under agreed conditions. A GPR investigation of the deeper Silwan slope following up on the 2018 anomalies. A systematic Iron Age burial survey of high probability zones in the Judean hills. None of those investigations is currently authorized or funded. The most precise reason the tomb may never be found is not that it was destroyed. It is that the single most likely location, beneath the Temple Mount, or in its immediate surroundings, sits at the center of one of the most politically sensitive jurisdictional disputes on Earth. The archaeology is subordinate to the geopolitics in a way that no scholarly argument, no funding decision, and no individual excavation permit can override. The ground that most likely holds the answer is the ground that no one is permitted to open. Solomon built a structure that three world religions consider sacred. The conflict over the land above his likely tomb is, in a direct sense, the longest-running consequence of his reign. His burial site remains unknown, not because the search has failed, but because the place where he almost certainly rests is the one place on Earth where the act of looking carries consequences no archaeologist has the authority to accept alone. The tomb is there. The question is whether the world will ever agree to find it.